it is 1:30. So let's kick things off, shall we, now that you are in the building? Well, first off, welcome to the third Twitter Spaces where real conversations happen. Straight up, no chaser. I'm Michael Morgan, Bipolar UK's Senior Communications Lead. Now, basically, for information, support, and advice on all the things that we'll be discussing today that are related to bipolar, you want to head over to bipolaruk.org. Obviously, once this Twitter space has concluded. Now, today, and in the run up to World Mental Health Day, which happens on this Sunday, this coming Sunday, actually, the 10th of October, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome today's guest, Ben, who is a mental health campaigner, blogger, reporter, brand elevator, conversation shaper, stigma smasher, and kickboxing pupil. Welcome, Ben.
Good to be here.
Thanks, Ben. Now, just for all of you who have now flooded in, if you want to, or if you can actually tweet out this space on your timeline, it's really easy. You see at the bottom of the screen, you'll see an up arrow. Literally, you can invite either your friends via DM, or you can actually do this via the timeline. Just cut and paste this, or if it's even easier for you, just retweet Bipolar UK's latest tweet. So on we go as you're finding your way through that. And if you wanted to let us know that you are still engaged in the conversation, you can use the emojis, which are basically accessible. If you press the heart plus, you can do 100, you can do clenched fist, you can do peace signs, you can do all manner of things. There you go. A few of you are getting it. Let's just see how many of you are actually accessing the emojis. Just give us a show of hands via the emojis that you are engaged in the conversation. And brilliant, brilliant, excellent. Keep those going. Now, as people are actually coming through, today basically is going to be very much a whistle stop tour, as it were, that speaks to the title of this session, and that is Men and Mental Health Stigma. Hopefully, if we do have time, we'll give those of you who are within this space an opportunity to ask questions. But, before then, I'm going to open up with a few questions of my own. And welcome, welcome, welcome everybody coming into the room. Lena, Naveet, Nicholas, Kiro, Mel C, and many others. Now, I'm intrigued, Ben. I'm intrigued by your personal journey. Well, when were you diagnosed with bipolar?
I'm 45 next week, and I was diagnosed when I was 36, which, according to recent research, is quite a common age for diagnosis, and it's been quite a complicated journey to kind of get to that point. Michael, if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind defining bipolar disorder in my kind of guise, if you like, for those of people that are joining us that might be family members or are kind of new to this subject. I appreciate
Take it away, Ben.
Yeah, great. So, of course, it's a mood disorder, and for most of us, it's a real lifetime of commitment. We know it primarily involves mania and depression, mixed states, and hypomania. But mood for us is much more than just being happy or sad. Mood for people with bipolar disorder, is really complex. It's like a jamboree that involves changes in confidence, speech patterns, anxiety, motivation, cognition, energy, muscle changes, perspective. And if you're working, it impairs functionality and productivity. And as I see it, it's like a balancing act that takes years to master. And I often get it wrong, but it's the practice and determination that I think is important in terms of our character. These attributes vary tremendously because of our internal and external influences. We'll all be familiar with the mood scale in terms of assessments within the healthcare profession and medical profession. But I'd also add a sense of gravity to that typical mood scale. And I don't know whether any of our listeners can associate with this, but I see it as like a force that pulls us into ourselves. If you can imagine like an astronaut space training gyroscope, where it pulls you in, it disorientates, it lifts you up, tears you down, and at points it can be quite scary. So that's kind of my picture, certainly my experience over the years of how I think a picture of bipolar is. I'm not sure whether that resonates with any of our listeners.
Well, they can use the emojis to let us know if it does actually resonate with them. And once again, the emoji, if you haven't been here before in terms of Twitter Spaces, is the heart plus symbol. You can actually use the emoji key to let Ben know if that actually resonates with you. But whilst you do that, Ben has actually given me a very good opportunity to plug our mood scale and mood tracker app, which I'm exclusively revealing will be launched this Sunday. This coming Sunday, World Mental Health Day, will see the launch of our mood tracker. Now, it's the first time that we've actually ventured into the world of apps. And our mood tracker basically will make it much easier to record your daily mood, medications, emotions, and how much sleep that you've had, allowing you basically to track your mood and basically your sleep patterns as well over weeks and months. Although also allow you to spot any early warning signs of a relapse and collect data to share with your family and your healthcare team. Now, all your data is completely private as it's stored on your device and it's not going to be obviously shared with anyone else. Now, it comes with the proviso, obviously, that the apps and the app is not a substitute for professional care. It basically takes 10 minutes to set up the Bipolar UK Mood Tracker app, and you can download it from Sunday at the Apple Store and Google Play. So, one of the things, Ben, that I'm kind of like keen to talk about really is to the title, and that is Men and Mental Health Stigma. So, just with that narrative in mind, men typically are quite insular when talking about their mental health. But why is it, in your mind, why do you think that it's important that they get the support and understanding that they need to stay well?
Yeah, you're completely right, Michael. And what a great resource to have that app and running. I'm definitely going to download that myself. And brilliant to see that you're embracing some technology that we can have in our pockets. Yeah, you're right. I mean, as men, we are pretty hopeless at conveying our feelings, our needs, our vulnerabilities, and that's even more prevalent when it comes to bipolar disorder. It's complicated. If we think about family and societal programming and prejudice, that could be conscious, unconscious, deliberate, accidental. It kind of sets a stage where we are told like how to perform, and exiting this stage is considered by lots of people to be unmasculine, unmanly, unfatherly, unnatural in many people's eyes if you're really old school and blind to the needs of people with mental health. And, undoubtedly this needs to change. And I think this conversation needs to evolve. And within this group, we have a responsibility to do this ourselves and to do this kind of together, and as men with bipolar, we all share the same struggles. But I do really believe that we're warriors and we are resilient and we can be steadfast, unwavering, and definitely of value. Deep down with men and mental health and stigma surrounding the subject, fear plays a massive role, as does, judgment. And if you think about coupling that with our self-judgment, our self-deprivation, our self-stigma, our poor performance, in the end of the day, is suffering. And it's suffering unnecessarily. You could say that manning up is actually manning down. And I think it's time as men that we challenge this unhealthy and unnurturing paradigm if collectively we change our mindset and we tell our stories to the people that really matter most to us. We talk, we open up unashamedly. Empowerment is really possible for us. And fortunately, through organisations like Bipolar UK, there is expert support, there are resources, advice to hand. Michael just mentioned the app. These guys play a supporting role that garners much applause nationwide. Bipolar UK offers substantial help and inspiration, that can really help our community with putting together like real solutions. I'm going to talk a little bit towards the end on some of the essential services. So stay tuned to that. I'm going to give you a bit of a list on what's available from the website and in local support groups. towards the end of this session.
So I'm curious, I mean, going back to yourself, really, I mean, you'll know probably firsthand what it's like to internalize your feelings and why, men don't tend to talk about them. Just from your own perspective, why is that? Or have I got you all wrong and you were quite open and very ready to talk about what is effectively a stigmatized condition?
Well, I think it goes beyond just being men. I think as men, there's role models in lots of different ways, be it that we're brothers, fathers, um, in our work environment, where people looking up to us for guidance. Um, that it be again, it's a complicated thing, but I think from my point of view, there was a point where acceptance, which I consider like a solar system, it's like a continual um, rocket ship across the stars where you think you've got to a point where you've accepted your condition and people are accepting you and you've got it nailed, got it down pat. But then you realize you've got to get up to another planet because there's more acceptance to do and sort of fly around the universe building on this practice of acceptance. And then you think about, in terms of my story, I've had many hours of therapy, from the lackluster CBT, the cognitive behavior therapy. I really loved acceptance commitment therapy and compassion focused therapy. I had psychological analysis to get this stuff in check with stigma really front of mind. 10 different medications, some worked, some didn't. All took hellish titration. I'm sure the community understands what I'm talking about. I've lost jobs because of stigma and misunderstanding about how bipolar works. Lost lovers. I've spent years in bed. My education's been hugely affected. We've been alone and lost. But, fundamentally, when I got to this point a few years ago, that I realized that there really is hope. I said at the beginning of this conversation that I think it took 30, 35 years to get official bipolar diagnosis. I'm 45 soon. My symptoms started when I was around 7. And initially medical professionals thought I had chronic fatigue syndrome or ME, and then maybe depression. There was a lot of misunderstanding through school, through college. Managed somehow to get a degree in PR, which is my career. But it's been a rough ride. And I think as men, we can associate with those kind of challenges, but we are still individuals, and now I have my own PR consultancy and I've had that on and off for a few years, but it's really taking off now. I have clients in London and Amsterdam. And one thing I really focus on, and I think this is particularly important as men within this conversation, is that we need to navigate our own path. And I believe we can do that by architecting our unique, what I call lifestyle design, to live with our inner hydra, our inner demon, and make it kind of work with us, accept it, know our limitations, but make sure we don't omit our opportunities and our contribution and our aspirations. Right at the heart of all this, what we're talking about is doing our own thing in our way and stepping outside of this stigma. One of the things that I wanted to mention today that is like a personal method of how I face my bipolar head on, and I try and live by, I get it wrong all the time, but perhaps this can help some of our listeners today, or maybe they'd like to challenge me on this stuff. But I call it spokes of the wheel, and this is something that I developed quite a few years ago around the analogy of bike riding. As we grow up, we learn how to ride a bike. We have stabilizers so we don't fall off. We learn how to stay upright, how not to fall over. We learn about direction, how to go fast, how to stop. We learn how to be around other people going the same way as us and those going in different directions. And our bikes have wheels. The wheels have spokes. So in my world, there are like 10 spokes of the wheel that I think as men that we can embrace, and anyone really bipolar could have a bit of a code to live by. And the idea is to keep these spinning naturally, gracefully, gradually every day. Like riding a bike nurtures you, and everyone knows that we never forget how to ride a bike. And there's kind of 10 spokes that I talk about. I'd be really interested to hear from people on the space today about what they think about this. But if we think about spinning that wheel like on a daily basis, so we're thinking about meditation, very, very important, and mindfulness. exercise and activity, a healthy diet, limited or no alcohol, and definitely no drugs, meaningful relationships, therapy, psychotherapy, knowing and staying clear of your triggers. Creativity plays a big role, whether that's in music or art or design or just participating in community groups, and then having that like work-life balance. And this stuff has really helped me stay focused. As I said, most of the time I get it wrong all the time. And I wonder whether, through the chat after this, Michael, whether any of those ideas again resonate with the guys that are on this call today.
Well, again, we are hopefully going to have enough time, as time is quickly marching on, to actually throw it out to the floor in terms of like Q&A and get people's views. But I just wanted to quickly just chime in with, I'm not sure if you saw this yesterday, but the Welsh Conservative leader, Andrew Davies, he's taken a break. And when you think of this, this is, I suppose, helping the narrative because he's been quite open. He's a Welsh Conservative leader, and he's basically said he's suffering from flu and COVID, well, the fallout from COVID, and it's had an impact on his mental well-being. Do you think like that helps the narrative in terms of if we have people in the public eye talking more openly about, especially men talking more openly about um, well, living with mental ill health. Do you think that helps or does that hinder?
Oh, it definitely helps because there can be an alliance of understanding of, from men in mental health that can associate with those kind of symptoms. I think luckily right now, society is becoming naturally a bit more open. Of course, there's still a bunch of stigma and prejudice around bipolar, and that's built around misunderstanding. So the more work that we can do with charities like Bipolar UK and as individuals within our families and our workspaces to feel comfortable with being open and know that that's okay. And from my own experience, I've been very lucky with freelancing for a bunch of different comms agencies in London. And I'm actually currently freelancing with an agency, and my boss is just incredible. She's recently given me some space to be able to get my brain back in gear because it had a bit of a wobble. And I guess that's possibly because she values the contribution that I make to her business. And of course, there's some adaptation within a business to be able to do that. And lots of companies will struggle to do that, particularly if they're like SMEs. But I think the more that we can talk about this, right down to the bottom line, which is, as individuals, when we're working like this MP, there's going to be times where things don't go quite right. But if you're really giving your heart and your soul into what you're doing, there has to be a place where that's okay. And companies and organizations can flex because they know you're worth it, and they see your potential, and they see the contribution to the conversation or to the work itself. So the more high profile people, be it that it's MPs or celebrities, we talk a lot about this, and just everyday people that we can associate with, more people that sort of say red flag, not doing too well today, I'm just going to take a little bit of a breather, and then accommodate that space, can only be a good thing. And society is becoming a lot more receptive, particularly young people, to understanding those challenges, continuing that conversation.
So, just looking forward now, just solutions. We know what the question is: why don't men talk? But what is the solution to that? Because there's obviously stigma at play here, there's obviously prejudice, there's obviously fear of judgment from others, which they, I suppose, internalize, and there is a judgment of self involved in that. But first of all, just from your perspective, your perspective, I mean, why don't men talk, and what is the solution to men not
Well,
talking?
sorry, we don't live in a vacuum. And so because we don't live in a vacuum, there's other people around us constantly. Um, uh, we know that there can be a risk to be really open about having bipolar in a work environment, and that can be a worry. As I said a second ago, that's evolving luckily now, but it's still quite selective. And I think that we're some way off before this becomes a norm, but luckily that is changing. And the more conversations we can have like this will contribute to opening that up and that making that more of a reality. But I think it's getting honest. This is what we're talking about here. It's getting honest, and it's knowing that bipolar is a condition of the brain. We don't select it, we don't choose it. It's an imbalance in the limbic system, with the hypothalamus and the hippocampus and all those other things in our brain that we don't have control of. So if we don't have control of, all we can do is live with it and give it our best shots. And so if you think about that from a self-judgment point of view, and all the trials and tribulations that go with that, we know it's not our fault. So I think that that's a good place to start, of then being able to talk to your family, talk to your friends, know that it's okay, know that it's not just about men, but everybody with bipolar, and sort of standing up, owning it, and being able to feel like you can be honest and not less than.
I hear you there. Well, just before we throw it out to the floor and invite people to give their thoughts and maybe react to, some of what you've been saying, I just wondered again, just sticking with solutions, how can people obtain the help that they need if they are living with bipolar?
So I think this is a good opportunity to highlight some of the services that you offer at Bipolar UK. And there's kind of four key ways that are easy to access right now. And as Michael said earlier, this stuff complements what you're doing with a therapist, your doctor, any treatment or meds that you're on with a psychiatrist. And I think you could call these a step towards a solution to being able to be more open and connecting with people in our tribe, as I call it. So I'm just going to go through these four, guys. So if you want to make any notes, then of course go ahead. Everything is centered around the bipolaruk.org website. So to kick off, we have online support groups. So the loads of open and honest conversations happening there. We also have local support groups that can be found at bipolaruk.org. I used to co-facilitate the Bournemouth and Poole and the South Coast support group. A really incredible experience to be in the same room with people that are of the same tribe. Very effective, warming space. If you don't want to share, you can just listen. But it's quite a thing to be in the same space as people that experience the same things that you do, and to know that you're not alone. Bipolar UK also has an e-community which has over 10,000 members. So huge amount of access to like-minded peers with lived experience. That is also on the bipolaruk.org website. And then another good resource is signing up to their newsletter, that includes a bunch of events, what they're doing on behalf of us, webinars, Twitter spaces like this one on a kind of regular basis. So, you can, again, be connected to what's happening in the real world and be able to access these things today if you need to, and kick out that shame. And let's move the conversation away from stigma and it just being an everyday thing, and that's okay.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to open up to our other guests who have come in the room, just to let you know that this session is being recorded. So if there is anything that you don't want actually kept for posterity, please don't speak on that. So first over to you, Mel C.
Oh, hi. Sorry, I didn't actually have a question. I just don't know how to use Twitter properly. But thanks to chat. I'm just listening avidly to the program, and this is the first time I've engaged in this charity, so it's really interesting. So thanks.
Right. I mean, yourself, Mel, do you actually live
Yeah.
with bipolar or do you have
Yes, I do. I was diagnosed, I think it's about 10 years ago. Um, I've actually been in hospital quite recently. It was, I think, my fourth hospitalization. So my father passed away
I'm
just
sorry to hear.
at the end of May. So I kind of ended up in hospital, had a manic episode, and yeah, it was kind of unexpected, because I'd been doing so well for about 10 years. So yeah, so still trying to get over that situation. Spent
And
about 3 weeks in hospital, so it was
and
pretty intense.
And what Ben has been speaking about over the last 20 or so minutes now, it's actually 25 minutes. Did that have any resonance with you? I mean, in terms of like men not being forthright and speaking about the condition and actually being honest about how they're feeling, would you say that you agree with that? And what's your own experience of that?
I mean, I was diagnosed, as I mentioned, about I think about 10 years ago, but my first episode was in university when I was about 21. Um, so from that period, from 21 until I think it was 10 years later where I had my next episode. So in that 10-year period, I spoke about it. I didn't really speak to anyone about it. I didn't really know have a diagnosis either. So you kind of just don't really know, is it just me or what the issues were. But from my diagnosis, I kind of make a point of being very open about my condition, and I think that's really important. I think as a man, I suppose I don't know. For me, it just mental health in general isn't really discussed about in a certain. I think it's more a certain generation. I would work with a lot of younger people, and they're so much more open about their mental health. And if they're not feeling great, they'll say, "I'm having a mental health day," and they have a different sort of connection and relationship to it. Whereas I think my generation is just a bit backward, but I think things are changing. Um, but yeah, I think my biggest issue with my diagnosis and just mental health in general is just the stigma attached to it, and also the terminologies that are used for the conditions. They sound scary. They sound, um, the terms that are used, are used in horror films and the use for dramatic purposes. So I think it's yeah, I think overall there needs to be a bit of a shake up in how these terms or how these conditions are, you know, the words around them and the terminologies, I think can be quite they add to the stigma and they add to that embarrassment,
That is
I think.
absolutely fascinating what you just pointed out there, and I, I suppose in a well, to an extent, if we are making things scary, you're right, that is chasing people away. So Mel, we are actually in the dying embers of this session, and I just
Yeah,
wanted to get one other person up. Lena, you've been
sure.
waiting patiently. Lena, your mic's now live
Yeah.
if you want to make your point.
Hi. I totally agree with what Ben and Mel have said. So basically, I don't have bipolar, but my husband has, and the issue here is totally associated with stigma, and as a result, he continues, though he acknowledges, but he at the same time is in denial, and then don't hasn't seeked the treatment, and as a result has faced a lot of complex psychological issues now. So that's so he presents himself well with the doctors, and he gets himself discharged. But however, he has cut himself completely from any, old friends, family, everybody. And he, whenever I have to report, he kind of like says that it's a relationship issue. So it's a huge issue at the moment for me. But I totally agree with what Ben said, that that men are supposed to be role models and stuff like that in the society, and that kind of like is one of the major factor. And I totally agree with Mel that there is a shake-up required in terms of how the terminologies are used in various, for example, in going back, I come from India, so going back into the Bollywood movies, if you see, many of the comedy scenes are related to, I mean, if it's about mental health, it's represented like a comedy, and that's not fair. So, so it's just that at the moment. I mean, of course, my husband wouldn't listen to such talks because he thinks he's fine, and probably if he knows that if I'm listening, he wouldn't be happy either. So, so that's it's a very difficult situation, and in this country, I've actually written to the local MP recently regarding the rules of at the moment related to if 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 the patient acknowledges. So the treatment is only given if the patient acknowledges, or or if the situation gets very worse that they can physically see it or note it. But if the relative is telling, they don't acknowledge that, because if the patient doesn't want it, then it doesn't happen. So that's another issue in the country at the moment.
Right. Ben, just at a risk of overrunning horrendously, we are 1 minute over time, but I just wondered if you had any words for Lena, considering, you know, she is now faced with somebody who is not accepting of the fact that, there is an issue there, is not accepting of the help which is out there. What
Yeah.
advice would you give, Ben? What advice would you give to Lena in particular, where she's sitting right now, and the issue that she's facing?
Well, I appreciate you first of all telling us that story and sharing where you are right now. What I would say is, in a nutshell, living with bipolar, you'll know this, living with a partner with bipolar, it's a process. And we each have to go through different stages of that process. You've touched on acceptance. I gave an illustration about it being like a solar system and a continual practice. But nothing will happen, nothing will change until shame is eradicated. And that takes time. To be able to know that, um, because it's difficult for us all to recognize that this thing is out of our control, but we can manage it and we can live with it, and people around us can live with it as well. But every single challenge that comes into play, exactly as your story just echoed, is around shame, is around embarrassment. And until that stuff gets worked through therapy, through talking, being able to, first of all, accept that speaking to a healthcare professional or a psychotherapist is a really good step. Engaging with Bipolar UK community, because that's kind of anonymous as well, could be a good idea for your husband to look into. But right at the core of everything, you can't see straight unless you're not ashamed, unless you're not embarrassed. And this isn't something that's going to happen overnight. There's all the programming that we talked about earlier. With your culture, I know that it's particularly challenging because the subject is in its infancy. Luckily, I think here this conversation is more mature. There's still a lot to do, but that's my advice: is start with that shame, um, and get talking with some therapy or accessing online services to realize that your husband's not on his own, and this is a brain malfunction, and that's okay. And with the right support, the right meds, the right therapy, he can absolutely live with it, stand tall, and keep his head high.
Thank you for that, Ben, and thank you for everybody who actually shared their story and their journey today. That's really brave of what you've done is a brave thing, especially in a forum where you've never met any of the people within this room. But Ben, I wanted to bring this session to a close, by thanking you first of all for one, stepping in at the last minute. We all know behind the scenes that this was actually seat of the pants planning, but thank you for that. But more importantly, thank you for sharing your story. And I'm really looking forward to meeting you in person in the coming weeks. For those of you who do want to actually follow Ben's journey, he's available at Benjamin_Flux on Twitter. And keep your eye on Ben, because I've got a feeling that Bipolar UK and Ben will be doing some great things in the coming weeks and months. So thank you all for attending this incredible session. Thank you all for being so patient with the tech. Thank you all for sharing your stories, those of you who did. And we'll catch you next time. Do have an incredible weekend and take care of yourselves.